So we think Mama's probably a no?
I am not sure. Probably. She asked what room it was in, so I assumed she was coming, but...
Yeah, she decides to sneak in, she can. All right, so welcome to your defense. Again, Aidan will spend 20, 25 minutes or so kind of going over his thesis and the work that he's done. We will then open it up to questions from the committee first. And then if your lovely wife and or Matt have any questions, we'll allow them to also ask questions. Then once all the questions have been answered, we'll ask everybody to leave the room. Your committee will chit chat for a few minutes, and then we'll make a decision.
Perfect. Okay. If I go over 25 minutes, is that a problem?
Not a problem at all.
Good.
You take as much time as you need.
We'll throw things.
Oh, that's great. I'm practicing dodging, so that's great.
This is the last thing I've got on my calendar.
This is the last thing I have on my calendar for this. Okay, so my thesis I'm calling Gamification in Fitness Apps, Analyzing User Motivation Through the Octalysis Framework. Introduction, I chose gamification for my thesis because when I was doing my graduate studies, I found that it was a very interesting, something that really interested me, adding game elements to more productive systems, something that I found fascinating, something that I enjoyed doing within the class, so it seemed like a good area to expound upon on my thesis. And I chose fitness apps for a couple of reasons. One, it seemed like a very natural fit, specifically a productive system that would benefit from game elements a lot, benefit from that motivation, something that people struggle with to keep motivated. And two, this was unintentional, but we started planning the thesis right around 2020. And fitness apps suddenly became a lot more popular, obviously. So it ended up being a very serendipitous time to pick this subject because right afterwards there was a lot of scholarship on it and there was a lot of interest in it. So it ended up working out really well. The theoretical framework that I specifically used was the Octalysis framework. We will delve into that more in the literature review, but very basically it uses 8 core drives to break down gamification and user motivation. It's a very user-focused approach to design, and so it was the theoretical framework we chose. And the theory I used was self-determination theory. Again, we'll cover that more in the literature review, but very basically it is the idea that transformation in users comes from internal motivation rather than external rewards or motivators. So the research questions that guided this thesis. Research question 1, to what extent does the gamification present in fitness apps fit within the Octalysis framework? Research question 2, how well does the gamification present within the fitness apps encourage self-motivated change in users as informed by self-determination theory? Research question 3, how can fitness apps better implement gamification to engender change in their players? So literature review, the first thing I looked at was the fitness apps. As I said, there was an increased use during COVID. Tong et al. Had a study saying that every year since 2020, there's been a substantial increase in fitness app usage. There was a slight dip in 2024, but it was still substantially higher than it was before COVID. And they also found that users who used fitness apps in conjunction with other means of exercises, a gym or running, or walking, were far more likely to report that they were motivated to continue exercising. Similarly, Parmisakara in 2014 did a pilot study on fitness apps, specifically looking at fitness apps versus traditional exercise. They had users do exercises in a gym in an instructed environment and then do the same exercises guided by fitness apps at home, and they measured their heart rate and calories burnt to check if the fitness apps gave a comparable exercise. This was an important study for the thesis because if fitness apps weren't good at encouraging exercise, then it wouldn't matter if they could change behavior because they wouldn't be effective at the goal we're using them for. But thankfully, the study did suggest that fitness apps were just as effective as traditional exercise when used properly and when the user was properly motivated at burning calories, raising heart rate, doing everything that you need a fitness app to do. Moving on, the Octalysis framework is a framework for gamification. It breaks it down into 8 core drives, like I mentioned earlier. The 8 core drives are epic meaning and calling, the need to participate in something greater than oneself, development and accomplishment, motivation based on improvement or leveling up, empowerment of creativity and feedback, motivating the user to use their creativity and try new strategies, ownership and possession, the accumulation of possessions is a key motivator for that drive, social influence and relatedness, activities motivated by the presence and influence of others, scarcity and impatience motivates users to try something to want something they cannot have or something in short supply. Unpredictability and curiosity, willingness to discover the unknown outcome and activities involving chance. A lot of card games, dice games use that core drive. And loss and avoidance, motivation related to things the user doesn't want to happen. The Octalysis framework further breaks those core drives down into left brain, right brain core drives and white hat, black hat core drives. For the left brain, right brain divide, the framework makes it clear that it is not a scientific definition. It's not saying that left brain core drives actively engage the left brain, but rather that left brain core drives are related to things that we typically associated with left brain behavior, specifically empowerment, social influence, and unpredictability. They are considered extrinsic motivators. Right brain core drives, accomplishment, ownership, and scarcity are considered intrinsic motivators. And then white hat and black hat function fairly similarly. Black hat is about short-term engagement, driving up the sense of urgency in the player to act immediately. Those 3 core drives are scarcity, avoidance, and unpredictability. White hat core drives are things that call to a higher purpose or the well-being of the player, and those are accomplishment, meaning, and empowerment. As the Octalysis framework says, the left brain and black hat core drives leave a bad taste in users' mouths when implemented, especially often. They are things that are often seen as predatory. A lot of things that you hear about social media apps, the downsides of them come from their reliance on left brain and black hat core drives. Finally, in the literature review, I looked at self-determination theory. Essentially, it's used to determine the efficacy of behaviors and the forces that reinforce them. Ryan and Decky had the pioneering paper on self-determination theory. Specifically, the sub-theory I studied was the cognitive evaluation theory. It argued that there are 3 psychological needs in a person: the autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy, the ability to be in control of oneself. Competence, the ability to control the outcomes to actually do what they want to do. And then relatedness, the ability to do those other 2 things in an environment with other people and be able to relate to them as they do them. It further states that intrinsic motivators are the most effective way, really the only way to make someone change their behaviors long term, and that extrinsic rewards and motivations paradoxically often work against the intrinsic motivators and actually make users less likely to change behavior long term, because they are not reacting to their intrinsic desire to do something, but rather to the extrinsic reward or the extrinsic motivator. Essentially, the theory argues that once the 3 needs are met, the user must be intrinsically motivated to change in order for that change to happen long term. So with all that said, the methodology for the thesis, I chose 20 apps among 5 categories, which was whittled down to 17 because 3 of the apps did not have enough interactive elements to be analyzed under the Octalysis framework in a meaningful way. The 5 categories came from the Google Play Store. They were the top 5 categories at the time, and they are lifestyle, motivation and self-help, improve your sleep, workout programs, and food and drink. I identified the interactive features in the games both from their Play Store features that they listed and from my personal play testing of the games. And then I broke down the core drives and labeled the features according to each core drive. The Octalysis framework has a method for giving each app a score, giving anything a score. And I use that to give each app a score. How it works is you find the number of features that can be categorized into each core drive. You add that number up and then square it, and that is the core for the square drive. And then you add all the core drive scores up. That's the Octalysis score for the system you're looking at, in this case, the fitness apps. Excuse me. So here's an example of what that looked like practically. Nike Run Club was one of the lifestyle apps. It had an overall score of 183, balanced in that it was relatively equal in the right brain, left brain core drives and the white hat, black hat core drives. It had a slight leaning towards the right brain. As you can see here, the Epic Meaning score, for example, had guided runs as motivation, and athlete stories, they had narratives of athletes to motivate the users. That fell into both narrative and elitism, so that counted as 2 points. The guided runs counted as 1 point, so 3 squared is 9, and that's how we get to 9 points for the Epic Meaning core drive. And then I did that for every core drive for each app, and then charted how the apps fell, left brain, right brain, and so on. So the results of that looked like this. The core drive, obviously, there on the left, the number of apps engaged means the number of apps that had a feature that fell into that category, and the average engagement score was the average score of all the apps for that core drive, basically the number of features on average that they had. A couple things jump out about the data right away. The number of apps that engaged with a core drive does not at all relate to the average engagement score. The core drive that was least likely to have features was unpredictability and curiosity, which is actually in the middle of the pack as far as the average score, implying that while apps aren't necessarily very likely to have features that engage with unpredictability and curiosity, if they do, they are likely to have several features. Conversely, empowerment of creativity and feedback had almost every app have at least one feature that engaged with it, but it had a very low score relatively at just 6.117, which is among the lowest, and implies that there was not a lot of deep empowerment of curiosity and feedback among the fitness apps studied. The only core drive that was engaged by every app was ownership and possession, which does make sense because the very act of downloading a fitness app is in a way taking ownership of your fitness goals. And the the core drive, which had the highest overall average Octalysis score, was development and accomplishment, which was featured in all but one app and had an average score of 19.588, which is a full 5 points higher than the next closest app. So that is by far the core drive that had the most features related to it. Breaking down the results a little bit further here, the average Octalysis score of all the apps was 69.3. Left brain core drives scored an average of 29.8, and right brain scored 39.4. The category breakdown is that motivation and self-help had the highest average at 124.5, with lifestyle coming second at 94.3. Both of those, as you can see, were very balanced in terms of left brain, right brain core drive representation. Motivation and self-help is almost exactly split down the middle. Workout programs had 62.0 average, and improved sleep had 47.3. Food and drink had 16.5. It had by far the least interactive elements in general. And all of the apps that I had to exclude from the study were from the food and drink section because they did not have enough interactive features. Most of them were just recipes or calorie counters and did not have a lot of engaging features that could fall under the Octalysis framework. The last three categories, workout programs, improved sleep, and food and drink, all have a very heavy right brain lean. And generally speaking, although they had a lot less overall engagement, there is not nearly as substantial of a gap between their right brain engagement with the top two categories. I phrased that weird. Their right brain engagement on average is a lot closer to the lifestyle and motivation and self-help than their left brain averages. Overall, the apps favored right brain and white hat core drives. They featured intrinsic motivators, as I said in the app category breakdowns. The motivation and self-help and lifestyle categories were much more balanced, but overall, they generally trended to favor right brain core drives. An interesting note is that the more specific an app's purposes, the more right brain core drives were engaged. Motivation and self-help and lifestyle all had a very varied approach to fitness, whereas workout programs and improved sleep had very specific goals they wanted the users to accomplish, work out in a specific way or get 8 hours of sleep. And as such, they engaged core drives to fit a much more narrow purpose. Overall, left brain core drives were used much more commonly, but had a lower average octalysis score, whereas right brain core drives were used less often, but when they were used, they had more features dedicated to, or that could be put into each core drive. Overall, like I said, fitness apps were more likely to fit into right brain and white hat core drives. Lifestyle apps tended to be more balanced and had more features that fit into black hat and left brain core drives. The more specific activity, the more internal motivation. Empowerment and creativity is a particular area for opportunity. There were very few apps that engaged with it, and the Octalysis framework breaks down how that is actually one of the more important core drives because it, if it's implemented properly, games that use empowerment and creativity well can be self-sustaining ecosystems for years, decades even, things like Minecraft or even just playing with Legos, that encourage users to actively re-engage with them, often in a self-motivated way. Social influence and relatedness was engaged rarely, but deeply. Essentially what this means is that some apps didn't have any social features. If they did, they had a lot of social features, and many aspects of the app coincided with those social features. Loss and avoidance appeared in almost every app, but was unlikely to be included in more than one element. Most apps had one feature that could be categorized into loss and avoidance, but didn't engage with it any more deeply. So to readdress my research questions, to what extent does the gamification present in fitness apps fit within the Octalysis framework? Overall, the research suggests that the gamification present fits well within the Octalysis framework. The Octalysis framework being a human-focused theoretical framework, most of the apps were generally designed for the user. They minimized the harmful things, the things that leave a bad taste in users' mouths, and usually did things that were in the interest of the user. The features were generally designed in a way that was helpful rather than harmful, and apps focused on right brain core drives or were balanced. There was no app that focused heavily on the left brain core drive and encouraged users to interact with the app in a negative way, encourage a negative feedback loop. My research question 2 was, how well does the gamification present within fitness apps encourage self-motivated change in the users as informed by the self-determination theory? As I had mentioned, self-determination theory argues intrinsic motivation encourages change, extrinsic motivations can hinder it. Generally speaking, the apps focus on intrinsic motivators. The lifestyle and self-help genres could have focused on intrinsic motivators more. They did have a lot of features that focused on the left brain and black hat core drives, but something that I noticed in my research was that those very features were essentially what separated lifestyle apps from workout apps. If you take away the features from Nike Run Club, like the social features, the leaderboards, all the things that fell into the left drive core brains, then essentially you are left with a workout app, an app that would be categorized as a workout app. So definitionally, lifestyle and self-help apps were just more likely to include those kinds of core drive features that fell into those types of core drives. Workout and improve your sleep focused on the right drive core brains more, although they could have done so, primarily focused on right brain and white hat core drives, but they could have done so more. On average, they had less engagement than the lifestyle and self-help. They had less features that featured interactivity. Those could have been improved to increase the user experience and to increase change in the users, So research question 3, how can fitness apps better implement gamification to engender change in their players? The easy answer is to focus on right brain core drives and white hat core drives. It is more complicated than that. Extrinsic motivators are a very successful thing for apps because they can encourage users to interact with them, often in a very predatory way. However, the extrinsic motivators can be very helpful, according to self-determination theory, as a way of informing and suggesting rather than controlling. A fitness app would need those kind of extrinsic rewards, for example, as a way to give feedback on an exercise, on a run, on the night of sleep you got. And specifically, self-determination theory mentions that social relatedness is a very important component. However, a lot of the apps had social relatedness used in a way that set up an adversarial relationship, a leaderboard, for example. An example of something that might be more helpful according to the theory would be if there were a community relatedness goal rather than a competitive one. For example, trying to get your local community to run a set number of miles rather than trying to be the one in your community who runs the most miles. Specifically, additionally, unpredictability and curiosity was the core drive that is both a a white hat and a right brain core drive that was the most underrepresented. And I believe that is a big area of opportunity for fitness apps in the future for a method of interactivity that could engender change in the users. Any questions?
All right. Thank you. Excellent. I will open it up to my colleagues first for questions.
First off, Aidan, really nice work.
Thank you.
Glad to see this cross the finish line. It's a hard thing to do to write a thesis because it's a fussy matter of business where you're digging into details that we tend to gloss past in the production of something creative or in day-to-day life and so forth. So you did a really nice deep dive on all this stuff, and it's pretty rare to find a master's thesis that involves theory, not just as a method. I mean, the octalysis thing, that's pretty regular. I was really impressed to see the social determination theory in there, even though the SDT abbreviation kept switching in my out brain to SDT.
That's a different thesis.
That's a whole different thesis in a whole different department.
A couple of questions, One is, you focused on level 1 octalysis, as in terms of just what the motivations are in the functions and the manner of the game. There are a couple of other levels in here, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to put these in, but there's level 2 and level 3, and level 2 is kind of about the process of using the game, and level 3 is about, the player type and how it's involved. Just from your experience with this and you're digging in, do you think that there could be shifts or changes or places where the results clarify maybe a little bit because of the way the process moves through for the user, and then also for the different types of people who are going to engage with motivating apps for different reasons? Do you think those things could shift some stuff in interesting ways?
I'm sure they definitely could. One of the limitations of the thesis, I should say, is that it was all analyzed theoretically. Yeah. Looking at a specific user base, looking at user motivations in a more specific way I'm sure would net more specific information that would give us a more useful, more definitive set of data. However, I specifically kept it to octalysis level 1 because that's what we learned in class. Yeah. But 2, because it focused on motivation, and that is primarily what self-determination theory argues is key to changing user behavior. Yeah. User profile obviously would be important in that, but broadly speaking, self-determination theory would argue that level 1 would be the most important place to look.
Nice answer.
Thank you.
I have a question for Kevin.
Yeah. Do you want to get up here? Or?
Do you think that in Aidan's definition of octalysis, it's necessary to at least make mention of levels 2 and 3? Like, I'm not talking major, but a paragraph, a sentence or 2.
I was thinking more in for future research.
In future research section?
Yeah,
okay.
So it's like just a line or so noting there are more sort of directions that octalysis can go, and it could be interesting for future study to look at how they fit in fitness apps and how those influence things. That's all you can say. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So 2 sentences, 3 sentences, future work. Yeah. By the way, I'm taking notes for you. I'm just making them a comment off of the introduction heading of your thesis. So I'll take notes from what Kevin and Tom offer. That way, you can break it up.
Last of my this is the last of the specific questions. thinking as I was reading about perceptions from self-determination theory and extrinsic motivators, wondering if those extrinsic motivators have high value at the beginning of behavior change, and then it's later on that they become a complication to behavior change. That's just another sort of like, what do you think, man?
Give an example. I think
So,
I'm following you. But
yeah, I mean, just, like probably the biggest app I use for, self-improvement is Garmin's app, where there's a lot of gamification stuff in there. There's badges and awards,
right.
Things like that. And I'm kind of actually weirdly surprised with how engaged I am with them. But as I was reading your thesis, it struck me that probably the reason I'm engaged with them is because it's a conversation point with my brother. So in a sense, it's probably more of a social thing,
Mm-hmm.
an extrinsic thing for me. But it also made me think, I wonder how much those badges and level up kinds of extrinsic motivators helped get me to a point of habitualization.
Mm-hmm.
So going from, all right, I'm gonna get my sorry ass back on my bike for the first time in 30 years and go suffer through some painful rides, which I've tried multiple times in my adulthood and failed at after a couple of weeks, to crossing that point where it's just like, now if I don't go do that, I feel like crap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just kind of, it's just made me wonder, it's just like, is there a really interesting early stage specific role for extrinsic motivators?
That's actually, that's a really good question and a good point, because what you're talking about makes me think about how I work out almost every day. But on the days that I don't work out, I get real irritated with my Apple Watch. Because I've made a decision to take the day off, and halfway through the day, I'll get a notification from my watch that says, there's still time today for you to get your workout in, and I get irritated because I think it's almost like the watch doesn't want me to rest, or is like trying to guilt me into exercising on a day where I actually need the rest or whatever it is. And it does for a moment make me feel bad.
Yeah.
That I'm not doing it, even though I know that I've made the conscious decision not to, because I just worked out 6 days in a row and I need a day off. My watch telling me, there's still time, you suck.
I noticed on Training Peaks a week or two ago, they actually exercise. It's like, if you're planning a day off, plug it into the calendar. So they actually have a thing you can put in
so that the
for
watch
a day off.
doesn't.
So that the rest of your, and so your little score, because they don't give you this color-coded score of your compliance.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's just an awful word,
Yeah.
but, and it feels good when you see that I did all of my workouts this week and I did them to target, and all of those things is great. And then you see a yellow one, and you're like, oh, I hate myself slightly. You see a red one, and it's just like, oh, the guilt thing. So they're basically saying, don't let that happen. Plug in, make that day off an official thing, even if it's at the last minute at 11:50 a.m. And see, this is what happens at these. We start napping.
Yeah. To address what I think the question is at this point,
Yeah, I was going to say, is the question even clear anymore?
whether or not extrinsic, let me say what I think the question is so I get it. The question is whether or not extrinsic motivations are initially helpful for basically hooking the user until what they are doing becomes habit.
Yes.
Sure.
Paraphrasing.
I would argue that self-determination theory would argue that no, the initial drive for your use of the app. You downloaded a fitness app because of an intrinsic design to change, ideally, and the extrinsic motivators therein are just the window dressing of that intrinsic motivation, is probably what they would argue. So I would say there is certainly something to be said about an extrinsic motivator pulling you into something, but you have to be intrinsically motivated to do the thing that the app is asking you to do.
So would you say that on those days where I get that message, the extrinsic motivation might be that the watch is bugging me. The intrinsic motivation is I feel bad because I am motivated intrinsically to check the box, to achieve the thing, to
Yeah. I would argue that that is actually a good example of an extrinsic motivator preying on your intrinsic motivation and trying to make you do something that is objectively not good for you.
Right. Objectively not good for me. Because
Right.
at some point you do need to rest your body.
Right.
And the watch is not taking that into
Right. Because
unless you tell it to.
right. Because it's the prerogative of it to be used, essentially.
Yeah. That's great.
Last question I'll ask you. Is there useful stuff in this for you? It doesn't have to be.
For me,
yeah. Is there something about this that's like, wow, I could do that, or I could put that to use, or this is really interesting, or is this just I was really curious, I was curious about this thing, and I finished my thesis?
I would say there is useful stuff in it. Since I stopped working on my thesis, I have been very interested in game design, and so the process of studying it this in depth definitely helped inform some of the stuff that I've done. So I would say that was useful. I don't think the specific data has been particularly useful to me, but the process of getting it was a useful thing to do for sure.
I think were you to go chase down game design jobs or work or dabbles or anything about that, it's still a nice thing to have this thesis is. It's like, this shows you how much of a nerd I am.
Right.
I'm going to piggyback on that for a moment because I'm going to say something you might not want to hear.
Okay, I'm ready.
But in spite of the fact that you collected this data a couple years ago, and we talked about when we started picking this back up again that it is old data.
Mhm.
I think with a little bit of revisiting of the data to maybe make it more current, and maybe that doesn't need to, because maybe that not. I'm gonna put myself out on a limb and say not that much has changed about these apps.
Yeah.
That would require a fully new analysis from scratch. My guess is you could go back to each app, you could do a quick review to match it against what you currently have and tweak if necessary. Apps update, add new features, but not to the extent that it's going to change the score that much, right? So I think with a little bit of work, and I'd be willing to go there with you if you want to, I think there's a publishable conference paper in this. And the reason I think you might want to consider doing that is that it is an even better line on your resume for if you want to go after a job in that domain, to say, not only do I have this experience, did I do this thesis, do I know how to do this kind of analysis and this kind of work, but I'm published. And I think you might be surprised at how one published paper could actually put you over the edge when it comes to a job.
Sure.
So I'm just putting that out there. You don't have to, but if you want to go down that path, I'd be willing to go down with you, and I'd be willing to kind of help you recraft this and get it into. Because here's the other thing: we pick a conference to present this at. All really, other than going in and maybe revisiting your data a little bit, it's a copy and paste to get it to turn it into a 10-page conference paper. You're not rewriting anything or reanalyzing anything or even rethinking anything. You're just taking what you've done here and figuring out a way to whittle it down to a 10 to 12-page conference paper. I think you should consider it.
We'll see how I feel in a month.
Michael Corleone's great line was every time I try to get
Exactly.
really
The thought of spending more time working on this paper right now makes me want to cry.
I understand. I'll bug you in a month.
That's great. Yeah, that's true. Right.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, so first of all, very appreciative you diving into this topic, and it's really helpful for me to explain to my students who do use gamification a lot. But a lot of times what I found was they are mainly focusing on external motivation, extrinsic motivation, because those are easy part to implement.
Right.
Where those metaphors, those grades, those points. But what's the hardest part is the intrinsic part. How do we motivate people especially the fitness app, we want them to lead a like long-term behavior change.
Mhm.
I think that's quite important.
Right.
So when I look at reading your paper, one thing it pops up is like epic meaning and calling. That's what it happened in Cho's framework. But how do you interpret that in the context of fitness app?
Mhm.
Or could you please explain?
Yeah. That's a great question. So a lot of fitness apps use kind of narrative as a way to feed into epic meaning and calling. Specifically, to go back to the Nike Run Club example, it had a lot of videos, a lot of things you could watch or read or engage in that told athletes stories to try to contextualize your exercise as kind of an act in a larger fitness goal, in a sense, an act in a larger fitness community almost. That was something that I saw in a lot of apps. They contextualized it. Not just as you exercising, but as you bringing your body to the fullest extent of its, physical capabilities or pushing your boundaries. You'd be finishing a run or a walk, and it's if you just go 5 more, minutes, then you've beaten your personal record. You're pushing yourself further than you've ever done before. A lot of fitness apps implemented things like that spoke to kind of the epic meaning core drive there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, this is really helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm maybe suggesting in your paper you can do a little bit of explanation
Sure.
for those different categories. What does it mean in the context of fitness to help people like me to understand each criteria
Sure.
category?
So like do a breakdown of an example of each, right? Yeah.
Yeah, after you explain it, that fits perfectly.
That's great.
Show didn't, that framework is more like a general framework.
Right.
But he didn't explain it in the specific context.
Right.
Of the fitness app.
So I actually really I should have thought about this sooner. This is a really good recommendation for each core drive,
Right.
giving an example that is specific to fitness apps, so that you're really helping the reader understand clearly, like not just this is what epic meaning and calling means, generally speaking, but here's an example of how it can be applied in the context of a fitness app. I think that would be a really good ad.
Would that be under methodology, probably, or
I think it might be
research?
Wherever you explain
right.
that.
Yeah, you do.
Probably.
The first time that you list the core drives, I think, is actually in your lit review, isn't it?
That sounds right.
Under gamification and the autolysis framework.
Right.
Yeah, that's the first. Yeah, you say the autolysis framework consists of 8 core drives: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would, and I'm going to put it right here. Oh, you have a table. Yeah, right. The table from here.
Right.
Table 1. You could
Just make a call.
make a third column in that table that is, the name of the core drive, the like pure definition, and then an example in the third column.
Okay.
So I'm just going to put a note here, add a third column. If you decide not to do it that way, that's fine, but I think that would be the cleanest way to do it.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My wife, actually, when I was practicing, she encouraged me to do that today, and I completely forgot.
She's a smarty.
One thing when I read it, I chose a framework when you explained that. Your show did not suggest every app should find balance.
Right.
And interesting. But you explained very well. According to self-determination theory, a balance needs to be defined.
Right.
Because self-determination theory is more focused on the long-term change rather than the short-term change, right?
Right.
Specifically for fitness apps. So, based on your review, what's the ideal balance look like?
That's a great question. So I did suggest that at the end that focusing on right brain and white hat core drives was ideal, but also you need to have social and relatedness. I think an app that doesn't use scarcity and loss and avoidance at all is pretty much impossible and would maybe necessarily not even be ideal as far as apps go, just because of the way users behave with apps. Personally, I think that the ideal breakdown would be something in the ballpark of 70 to 75% right brain, 30% left brain. And I think black hat, white hat would probably be a little bit more like 80-20, something to that degree. But that's roughly what I would put the ratio at for the core drive, ideal core drive distribution.
Because you focus on a little bit more on the long term.
Right, exactly, because of the intrinsic motivator. Yeah, the intrinsic motivation encourages long-term change. You need, as was suggested earlier, extrinsic rewards can be very helpful, and obviously you need to give feedback to the user in many cases, so you can't get rid of those entirely. It wouldn't be a good system if you did. But I think primarily you would want to focus on 70-75% on the intrinsic motivators.
This is really helpful. I'm so glad you consider the context.
Mm-hmm.
That thing we should think about. What kind of tools do you design? Because you might feel that from educational technology, we are focusing on most likely on the lifelong learning. So that's why intrinsic motivation is so important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we want learners to be lifelong learners. So instead of just giving them the reward, we want them to say, "Hey, I want to learn."
Right.
To do something myself. So, yeah, really helpful.
Perfect.
Any other questions or comments from you two? Chloe and Matt, any questions?
Yeah.
Here it comes.
This should be a fun one. I just want you to expand a little bit on the drive for creativity and empowerment, specifically because you identified it as an opportunity. So I'm wondering how you might implement that in an app if you were designing one for fitness or lifestyle, whichever one you want to.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so like I had suggested, a way that could manifest is the social relatedness is a necessary core drive for self-determination theory, but it can often put people in an adversarial relationship. I think a great fusion of social relatedness and creativity would be something like if everybody collectively does a certain activity, walks a certain amount every day, then there is some reward that the whole community will get. Something that comes to mind, I've been seeing a lot of ads recently for an app that lets you feel like you're walking through Mordor, lets you feel like you're walking through the Lord of the Rings books. And there's something like that, but communal. I think that would be a great way to implement creativity and bring in that social relatedness to it. Specifically just creativity, I am not entirely sure. I think part of the reason why it's so underutilized is because exercises inherently want you to do the same thing over and over again in a specific way. I think there is opportunity for rewards for that in creative ways, but I'm not entirely sure what that would look like over the, stretch over an entire app.
So your example of storytelling is interesting, like the whole walking through the Lord of the Rings, like bringing story into it. There's a running app. I don't know if you came across it. I had totally forgotten about this until just this month. Zombies Run,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, where you're like, you have to run faster because you're being chased, and then it kind of, which I think is really interesting. I have never tried it because I would not like it. I know I would not like it because I don't want to be feeling like I'm being chased while I'm exercising. Women have it bad enough when we're out on the greenway worrying about you being chased. I don't need actual. But I bring that up because I wonder when you're talking about a community, a collective activity where you're not necessarily doing it at the same time, but you all feel that you're contributing collectively. I wonder if there is a way to bring storytelling into that, like crowdsourced storytelling.
That. And if you had like a collective team-based zombies run where you and your team could figure out how to avoid the zombies. But I was also thinking
like fan fiction, like some kind of fan fiction take on.
But I was also thinking about zombies run as a black hat motivator if you were allowed to be the zombies. Chase them, get their brains.
Right, that'd be a good one. Yeah. So to answer your question, I don't have an answer. I have some thoughts, but I think the reason why it is so underutilized is because it is a hardcore drive to fit into this specific context. Because you want people to do, again, the same thing over and over again in the same way.
And you don't necessarily want people to be creative.
Exactly.
The way they're lifting 50 pounds over their heads. Because, anything creative is probably not correct.
an opportunity might be something like the way you structure an exercise and then how you feel about that exercise afterwards might be, I don't know that that would be like engaging enough to be a good motivator, but that's an idea.
Well, exercise was only one of the categories of apps that you
That's
looked at,
true.
so there's probably a chance for creativity to be better implemented in some of the other spaces.
That's true. So a good example, thank you for bringing that up actually. A good example of a way creativity could be used well, there's a sleeping app that I thought was a lot of fun. It's called Sleep Town or Sleep City or some similar such. And when you sleep, it functions like an idle game. If your phone is idle for 8 hours when you say you're going to sleep, it constructs buildings for a little town. And I think a fun way of implementing creativity with that would be instead of just an idle game that constructs buildings, if you make a choice within the city, or if it was like a tower defense game, for example, and you had a lot of freedom with how you interacted with that system, but the only gameplay of it was being idle for 8 hours while you slept, that would be a way to kind of bring creativity into a fitness app while also matching it with its intended purpose. Thank you for bringing that up.
Ownership too.
Yeah.
I'll go just because one of us asked a question. So my question is actually about zombies, or the thing you identified as the least actionable within the fitness apps was unpredictability. I believe is what it does a really good job of unpredictability as well, because I've used it before, when you're running, it'll just be like, oh, there's a zombie, now you have to run twice as fast. So are there other, I guess, one, check that game out when you get back to Jen about this next level. But also, are there other ways you can think of to like add some of the unpredictable elements back? It's basically Chloe's question, or is it a different aspect? But how might you add unpredictability to some of these?
Sure. So some ways you could add unpredictability. Generally speaking, similar to creativity, unpredictability is something you don't want in fitness. You want very regimented, very safe, very reliable. But a way you could add unpredictability would be in social aspects, or because so many of them do have an adversarial social relationship. For example, it could randomly pair you up if it's a running app with another person similar to your level and say, you two are running against each other today. If you win, you get bragging rights or a medal or what have you. And that every day it's a new person, every day it's random. Yeah, it could be something like that where playing into the social aspect, which again I feel is a little bit underrepresented in many fitness apps, and bringing in an element of chance that is both fun and engaging.
And it doesn't just have to be competition either.
Right.
It could be like, today, this is your accountability partner, or this week, this is your accountability partner.
Right.
Or it could be framed competitively, but it could also be framed
Or to speak
as a support tool.
yeah, if you both achieve this goal together, then
Yeah.
Right,
Or
exactly.
Yeah.
Or it could even be that the people are all the same, but it gives you a randomized goal for the day. It could be running, could be walking, could be push-ups, could be sit-ups, and that's how we get that unpredictability.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because according to self-determination theory, you have autonomy
Mm-hmm.
and religiousness, because it's very important, when you have autonomy, you have the freedom to try something that's related to your goal. Probably can customize your fitness goal a little bit.
Right.
Create a, more like a, I don't know, it's more like a systematic way to achieve your goal. Maybe, you can, for the business app, it can provide some creative suggestions, like how you can, like for example, like you have a limited space, and how could we do some exercise with a limited space?
Yeah.
Provide some ideas, suggestions, but not dominate
Right.
specific activity you do. Just to give them some prompts, maybe.
Yeah, I like that. Like I have a basement that I'm in. I can't run. I don't have a treadmill. Give me a random exercise I can do for 30 minutes in here.
Or I'm traveling and I'm in a
Right,
smaller
yeah.
room, and I need just something that I can do in this like little space.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Interesting that that's not really explored, because I think fitness influencers are like really popular now. People follow so many different people for like workout ideas, and it's weird more, there's not like a community side where you can share workouts and stuff.
Mm-hmm. We'll be pioneers.
Because moderating that would be kind of tough. Anyway.
Well, what you're talking about is exactly what I think you should consider publishing this paper. I think that your thesis is very publishable, and I think that it would be very valuable to a community of app developers in this space in terms of giving them something concrete and a language and a framework that's exemplified and coded to reference for future development.
So you need structural design, you call it a design framework, we need kind of design guidelines, like that.
Yeah.
Talk about, okay, if we're gonna design a fitness app, we'll focus on intrinsic motivation, which factors we want to consider. And your paper will be perfect fit for that. So,
And your paper does a really, really good job, I think, of identifying, as we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes, where opportunities exist to innovate in this space. I think it's very clear to us after reading your thesis where the opportunities exist to innovate in the space. I think that would be a pretty publishable piece. Other comments, questions, concerns before we kick you out of the room? Okay. Give us
Don't
a
go
few
far.
minutes. Don't go far. It won't be long. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you need the mic back?